Let me start with something that tends to get lost every single time this story comes up. Colleen Ballinger is not just a YouTuber who got into drama. She's one of the first true internet institutions. I know. Deep breath, pitchforks down. Let me explain. Colleen joined YouTube in 2008, which in platform years is basically the Stone Age. And within a few short years, her alter ego, Miranda Sings, wasn't just a channel, it was an ecosystem. We're talking live tours across North America and Europe, sold out venues, a Netflix series, a Broadway debut, multiple books on New York Times bestsellers list, merch, catchphrases, and a fandom with an actual name. That distinction here matters because what happens to internet institutions tells us way more about the platform culture than what happens to random creators who flame out after one bad tweet. And just to be clear, this is not a drama recap. I'm not here to relitigate every single allegation beat by beat. I'm not ranking apologies. I'm not here to scream about whether someone should or shouldn't be canceled. YouTube has plenty of that already. This is a case study about power, about platform culture, about accountability, and about how the internet remembers and forgets. Because Colleen Ballinger didn't fall because of one scandal. She fell because the internet she helped build no longer tolerates the rules she played by. And to understand why, we have to go back to the version of YouTube that made her famous in the first place. If you weren't on YouTube in the late 2000s and early 2010s, it's honestly hard to explain just how informal everything felt. Creators didn't feel distant, they weren't brands yet. There were no social media managers or PR teams, no crisis consultants quietly drafting notes app apologies in the background. The vibe was very much, we're all friends here. Creators replied to comments. They answered DMs, they joined group chats, they followed fans back on Twitter, they popped into Skype calls and live stream chats like it was no big deal. And you know what? The algorithm loved this. Parasocial closeness wasn't just culturally normalized, it was structurally incentivized. Engagement went up when creators responded. Loyalty deepened when fans felt special. And nobody was really talking about power dynamics yet, because YouTube was still pretending it was just people with webcams hanging out. The problem is that intimacy scaled faster than anyone understood. Creators went from a few hundred viewers to millions without any kind of training, oversight, or guardrails. There was no playbook for handling age differences, authority, emotional dependence, or the responsibility that comes with being someone's favorite person on the internet. And this matters especially in Colleen's case because her audience skewed young from the beginning, like very young. A large portion of her viewers were children, not just teenagers. We're talking kids. And kids don't yet have the language or life experience to recognize when boundaries are being crossed. They learn what's normal from the environments they're in. So if an adult creator sets a tone where oversharing is normal, where sexual jokes are framed as humor, where private messages feel casual and friendly, kids don't question that. They adapt to it. Not because they're reckless, but because they just trust the adult in the room. And for years, YouTube didn't just allow this structure, it rewarded it. The early internet encouraged intimacy without safeguards, and a lot of creators carried those habits forward long after they became dangerous. Miranda Sings didn't come out of nowhere. She emerged from a very specific cultural moment, one where cringe, shock, and irony were the joke. When Colleen created Miranda, the character was meant to be satire, a parody of talentless, self-absorbed people desperate for fame, overconfidence, delusion, zero self-awareness. On paper, that works. And in the late 2000s, it did work because the internet was obsessed with irony. The more uncomfortable something was, the funnier it seemed. And if you didn't get the joke, the assumption was that you were the problem. But satire only works when the audience agrees on who the joke is actually for. And that's where Miranda starts to break down. Over time, the character leaned harder on sexual innuendos, shock value, boundary pushing humor, and discomfort as entertainment. The issue wasn't that the jokes were edgy, it was that the clarity of the satire eroded. Was Miranda mocking inappropriate behavior or performing it? Were we laughing at the character or being trained to tolerate the behavior she was normalizing? That ambiguity here mattered, especially when the audience included minors. Because when satire loses clarity, it stops functioning as critique and starts becoming reinforcement. And here's the bigger problem. Internet humor evolves faster than personas do. What played as ironic in 2010 doesn't land the same way in 2020. Audiences change, cultural tolerances shift, and characters built on shock don't age gracefully unless they evolve. And Miranda didn't. She became a time capsule, frozen in an era that rewarded edginess without accountability, even as the internet around her started demanding clarity, responsibility, and intent. This is usually where things get uncomfortable, which frankly means we're right on schedule. Because up until now, it's been pretty easy to talk about platforms and comedy trends in the abstract. But every conversation about early YouTube eventually runs into the same wall: power. Not cartoon villain power and not secret mastermind stuff. Just the very real, very uneven power that exists when an adult creator has a massive platform and a young fan does not. This is where Colleen Ballinger's case stops being about vibes and starts being about ethics. So let's go ahead and lay out this dynamic plainly. You have an adult creator. You have a fan base that includes a significant number of minors. And you have direct access through DMs, group chats, live shows, and private conversations. That combination alone creates a power imbalance, even if everyone involved feels friendly, casual, or well-intentioned. A lot of defenses focus on intent. She didn't mean it that way. She was just joking. She didn't realize it was inappropriate. But intent isn't the central question anymore. The modern internet has largely shifted away from intent-based morality toward power-based accountability. In other words, it matters less what someone meant and more what position they occupied when they did it. When an adult creator initiates overly personal interactions with minors, the issue isn't whether they felt malicious. The issue is that minors don't have the social power, experience, or autonomy to meet that interaction on equal footing. Children don't yet have the language to say, "This feels inappropriate." They don't feel empowered to set boundaries with someone they admire, and they often don't recognize harm until years later, usually once they've grown up and learned how power dynamics actually work. And that pattern shows up again and again and again in this case. Former fans have described how conversations that felt normal at the time only became alarming in hindsight. Sexual jokes, oversharing, emotional reliance, requests framed as favors, and access framed as privilege. And fandom culture plays a huge role here. When everyone around you treats a creator's behavior as normal, it becomes incredibly difficult to be the one person that says, "Hey, this is weird," especially when the reward for staying quiet is closeness, being noticed, being chosen, being let into that inner circle. Access becomes the currency. And once access is something you can earn or lose, accountability becomes nearly impossible. This is why the question of harm can't hinge on intent alone. The structure itself was exploitative. An adult with cultural authority, a fan base with limited agency, and an environment that blurred boundaries instead of enforcing them. Even if no one recognized the danger in real time, the imbalance was always there. Now we need to talk about the scandals, just not in the usual YouTube kind of way. What matters here isn't every allegation in isolation. What matters is why this moment became the breaking point when earlier controversies didn't. Because if you didn't know, Colleen Ballinger has been in hot water before, repeatedly. Over the years, there were cycles of backlash from inappropriate jokes, questionable skits, offensive stereotypes, criticism of Miranda for crossing lines, and around race, mental health, and sexuality. The pattern was familiar. Criticism, then apology, then a subscriber dip, and then it stabilizes. And you know what? For a long time, that cycle worked. Even in 2019, when Colleen was criticized for sending lingerie to a young fan as a joke, the fallout was relatively contained. She apologized, acknowledged discomfort, and promised to be more mindful. And the platform moved on. So, why didn't it move on this time? Well, because this wasn't one allegation, it was an accumulation of them. Former fans came forward with similar stories, screenshots, group chats, patterns that reframed earlier incidents once dismissed as awkward or misguided, private conversations with minors, sexual jokes framed as humor, emotional reliance during personal crises, and requests for unpaid labor. Individually, these can be debated away. Together, they told a different story. So, timing here mattered. By the early 2020s, public understanding of grooming, parasocial harm, and power dynamics had shifted. Audiences were more literate, survivors more willing to speak. And this is just how the internet used to be, no longer carried the same weight. This was also the first time the allegations escaped YouTube drama spaces. Mainstream media covered it, sponsors reacted, tour dates were questioned, and what had once been creator drama became a reputational crisis. And credibility here was also very important. This time, documentations aligned. Screenshots, archived videos, testimony across multiple people. It became much, much harder to dismiss criticism as bad faith. And many of the people speaking out were no longer children. They were adults, looking back with context they didn't have before. And that's why this moment stuck. Not because the behavior was new, but because the culture was finally ready to name it. Alright, now we need to talk about the ukulele video. Or as the internet will remember it forever, toxic gossip train. After months of criticism and mounting allegations, Colleen posted a video that was not a traditional apology. It was performative, ironic, musical, and, to put it gently, wildly misjudged. Here's the thing about modern internet apologies. The tone matters. The internet can forgive mistakes. What it struggles to forgive is perceived insincerity. I think we know someone else that knows a thing or two about that. And singing about your own controversy with a ukulele, that's a risky move on the best day. The video included lines critiquing cancel culture, which in isolation might land, but placed directly after allegations involving minors, the tone felt dismissive rather than reflective. And meme culture, like it always does, took over immediately. The song became a joke, a reference point, a cautionary tale. It was shared, parodied, dissected, not because it was funny, but because it misread the rules of public accountability. What this moment teaches us is that on the modern internet, how you respond often matters as much as what you did. A poorly executed apology doesn't contain backlash. It escalates it. And this video didn't disappear. Colleen left it public. You can actually go watch it right now if you wanted to, which means an attempt at mitigation became permanent documentation of misjudgment. After the ukulele video, Colleen largely withdrew. Not vanished, but she kind of retreated. This is where the idea of a comeback gets complicated for Miss Ballinger. Some creators rebound, others disappear. Colleen landed somewhere in between, kind of like public shunning without full erasure. And it's important to distinguish terms here before we move forward, so we're all on the same page. Cancellation is social condemnation. Deplatforming is loss of access. Cultural irrelevance is when audiences stop paying attention. Colleen wasn't banned. She wasn't deplatformed, but her sponsors dwindled. Shows were canceled, engagement dropped, and skepticism around her has lingered. Sometimes the internet doesn't destroy creators. Sometimes it just stops caring. She eventually returned to vlogging with a more straightforward tone, acknowledging embarrassment and missteps with her ukulele apology and how she handled everything. But the audience had shifted, and the reach never recovered. This shows us another uncomfortable truth. Silence can be strategic. Not every withdrawal is repentance, and not every return is redemption. Sometimes creators simply recalibrate and continue where they still can. So what does all of this actually tell us? Well, 1, parasocial intimacy isn't authenticity. 2, power dynamics now shape moral judgment. 3, humor ages, and personas built on shock expire. 4, apologies are performances with consequences. 5, internet memory is selective but brutal. And finally, this story isn't just about Colleen. It's about a platform and a generation navigating changing rules in real time. Understanding her rise and fall gives us a lens into how influence, accountability, and culture evolve online. If there's one thing to take away from this whole thing, it's this. The internet's rules change faster than creators expect. Closeness isn't trust. Humor isn't timeless. And apologies aren't shields. And audiences, they're watching more closely than ever. So the lingering question becomes, who else is still operating by rules that no longer exist? That's the thought I'll leave you with. Something to chew on while you're scrolling, watching, and maybe even creating your own stuff. Because as chaotic as the internet is, it remains one of the most fascinating case studies in power, behavior, and cultural evolution we've ever had. And honestly, that's exactly why we keep watching. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate the support on these longer case studies more than you know. As always, if you've got thoughts, keep them thoughtful and drop them in the comments. We've had enough public shaming for one video. And if you enjoyed this case study, go ahead and hit that like button. I do a case study like this once a month. So if you don't want to miss the next one, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you get notified when I post next. If you want more case studies, I've gone ahead and started a playlist over on my channel. So feel free to binge if you feel so inclined. I gotta get going, so I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye!